Keselowski reveals he does not have a valid NASCAR license going into 2026 and has tests coming up to determine if he be cleared to run the Daytona 500 or not. And NASCAR confirms that the Charlotte ROVAL will not be returning in 2026 and will be going back to the Charlotte Oval for the fall race. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just some trails really quickly. First, going to take a look at a couple paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just some straight in them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Dawson Sutton's 2026 Rackley roofing scheme that will see most races throughout the 2026 season. I gotta say, I really like the look of the new Rackley truck the Rackley team's got for this year. I think it looks really good. I love the updated look. The colors look phenomenal, like the black, the blue, mixes really well. It's a nice looking truck. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Carson Hocevar's 2026 minor scheme that will see in 3 NASCAR Cup Series races throughout the 2026 year. Car looks pretty good in my opinion. Excited to see this car out for review events throughout the year. It does look pretty good. I think Spire knocked this one out of the park. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Austin Cindric's 2026 Menards Frog Tape scheme that I believe we're going to be seeing at Talladega in the spring. This car's alright in my opinion. I mean, usually hit or miss with the Menard schemes, to be honest. This one's not the best one I think that Penske's done, to be honest. There's some good look to it, but I think the colors are a little mismatch on it. It's not the perfect car. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Casey Mears' 2026 SI Yacht scheme that we'll see in the 2026 Daytona 500 as he attempts to qualify for the 500. Looks very similar to the car he had last year, the few events he ran with the Garage 66 team. Of course, having an opportunity to run the 500. I think it's okay. Not spectacular, but good to see Casey Mears back behind the wheel for the 2026 Daytona 500. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Moto Casino. As it was confirmed earlier today, the Moto Casino will be back to sponsor Spire Motorsports once again in the 2026 NASCAR Cup season. They'll sponsor all 3 Spire Motorsports Series drivers throughout the 2026 NASCAR Cup Series season for 6 events this year, including in this year's Daytona 500, where they're going to sponsor Michael McDowell. I got to say, Michael McDowell's car for the Daytona 500 looks really cool. I think the American flag touch of the car does look really awesome. And it's good to see Moto Casino back. They sponsored Carson Hocevar and Michael McDowell last year. I think they also did sponsor Justin Haley an event or 2 last year, I'm pretty sure. So good to see a sponsor back with the team once again. I think it's just exciting when sponsors that work with the team, you wonder if they're ever going to come back. Like some of the sponsors leaving, like McDonald's, for example, a couple of other companies have left some of these organizations, like 2311. But I think it's good to see the Moto Casino going to be stepping up to the plate once again. And glad to see he'll be back sponsoring the Spire Motorsports team for the 2026 NASCAR Cup season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about American Luge. As it was reported by Adam Stern last night that during the Olympics in 2026, we know that bobsledding and luge are going to have a partnership with NASCAR through the 2026 Olympics, which do begin in the next couple of days. And there will be NASCAR branding for the American Luge people that are going to be competing in that throughout the 2026 Olympics, while they're also going to be helping with NASCAR for some events when it comes to technology, among other things as well. This is an amazing partnership. Obviously, like I mentioned, Olympics are beginning this week, and I believe they start on Friday, so in the next 2 or 3 days, they'll begin. And we know that luge and bobsledding have had a history of NASCAR. I think Jeff Bodine had a history of having a bobsledding company, I'm pretty sure, that competed in multiple Winter Olympics in the past. So I think it's awesome to see and pretty cool that American Luge and NASCAR are working together for events. Really exciting stuff to see again, and nonetheless, it's pretty cool that American Luge gets the opportunity and gets the chance to work with doing some NASCAR branding for the 2026 year and the 2026 year as well. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about National Debt Relief. As it was announced earlier today that National Debt Relief is back to sponsor Joe Gibbs Racing and Denny Hamlin in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2026. They're going to sponsor Denny Hamlin for 12 NASCAR Cup Series races in 2026, up from the 4 or 5 races they sponsored in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2025. They will will be on the car for the Daytona 500 and many other events throughout the 2026 year. We've already seen the National Debt Relief car that will be on the racetrack this year, and now we'll get to see that car at least for sure in the 500 and a lot of other races. It's exciting to see National Debt Relief step up. This tells me more than likely that Progressive is going to be backing away just a little bit on their sponsorship. Progressive, I think, sponsored for like 20 or 21 races last year, most of the second half of the year. They're backing away a little bit, probably a little bit more they probably were originally backing, but you've got National Debt Relief stepping up, which I think is something really important, is having companies like this step up and sponsor for more events. Great to see them back in the sport once again, and cool that they'll get the opportunity to sponsor Denny Hamlin for 12 NASCAR Cup Series races in the 2026 year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jack Doohan. As it was officially confirmed earlier today that Jack Doohan will be joining the TGR Haas F1 team going into 2026. But he will not be one of the main drivers going the upcoming season. Instead, he'll be one of the reserve drivers for the TGR Haas F1 team in 2026. Obviously, the Toyota Gazoo Racing, which has association, but they become a premier partner of the Haas F1 team going into 2026. And we all, of course, know Jack Doohan was confirmed a couple weeks ago that he would not be back with the Alpine organization. There were a lot of rumors around where he was going to end up going in 2026. But now I'll get the chance and opportunity to do some reserve stuff with this organization and team in the 2026 Formula One year. If Esteban Ocon or his co-driver Ali Behrman has an issue or a problem, let's say he gets sick or something like that, he'll be able to step up and drive in place. He also will get the chance and opportunity to do some FP1 practice sessions, which could really help on the super license side of things, because I think he's still got a super license going into 2026. But I think it's a really good move for the team to bring him in. Glad to see he's getting the chance to be the reserve driver for the team, and maybe down the road, if things, and depending on contracts and stuff, maybe just maybe we see him go over and drive full-time for the Haas F1 team, maybe in like 2027 or 2028. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jenson Button. As it was announced yesterday that Jenson Button has officially joined Aston Martin as team ambassador for the team and program. And according to the deal, it is a multi-year deal to be with this team and program. This is really, really huge for Aston Martin. Obviously, Jenson Button has been involved in racing for a long time, the 2009 Formula One champion, and has been involved in doing a lot of other motorsports, and recently competed in the World Endurance Championship for the Jota team. He's also been recently open to maybe doing some NASCAR stuff in 2026. He might do the San Diego race potentially, maybe with like Tricon or Colleague or something like that perhaps. But Jenson Button working with Aston Martin, a team he has some alliance with, is not shocking and surprising, considering he drove for like Red Bull, drove for Mercedes, had a ton of success with, not for Red Bull, excuse me, but he drove for like in that kind of vein, I'm pretty sure. And he had a lot of success, drove for McLaren, had a ton of success in motorsports, drove, of course, for the Braun GP team, got them that championship in 2009, and gets a chance and opportunity to be the brand ambassador for the team and program going into 2026. I think he's going to do a phenomenal job in this. I'm excited to see what he can do as a team ambassador, because I think he'll be able to bring sponsorship in, as Aston Martin is setting up for a pretty good year. Obviously, got Adrian Newey over there designing a lot of stuff and helping get that car ready for 26. A lot of people think they're going to be a really strong team this year, even though that Lance Stroll's still over at the program, but still nonetheless great to see that Jenson Button is over there. I think he's going to do a pretty good job working there as a team ambassador for the team and program in 2026. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Nate Bargatze. As it was announced earlier today that Nate Bargatze will be given the command for the 2026 Daytona 500. Nate Bargatze, I believe, is someone who is a comedian, I'm pretty sure. I don't really know the full context of him. I've heard the name before. I think he's done some stuff with NASCAR in the past, I'm pretty sure. But I think he's been on a lot of different shows. But I'm not the most familiar. But that being said, it's exciting to see someone new come into the sport, right? And I really hope he can do a really good job giving the command. Because what you want to see from a command, someone that's giving it, especially these celebrities and all these comedians, you want to see people give the great commands. We've seen, of course, the legendary commands from like Kevin James, where he gave the fantastic commands in 2007 with Adam Sandler, among other names. And we've seen amazing commands from these comedians. I remember Matthew McConaughey's one from the 2005 Daytona 500. And I certainly think that he has a really good chance and opportunity to prove to be one of the best to ever do it. So I'm really excited about this. Hoping they can do a really, really good job. Given a command, again, I do expect it to show some good things. And again, I think he'll probably do a solid and pretty good job given a command for the Daytona 500. Great opportunity for Nate Bargatze to give the Daytona 500 command in 2026. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Indy 500. As it was announced earlier today that the Indy 500 and Indianapolis Motor Speedway are bringing back a tradition in 2026. They are bringing back the Indy 500 branded milk bottles in the 2026 year. A lot of them, I believe I saw that Alex Pelos got one from the Indy 500 champions. I think I saw one for Ryan Hunter-Reay, Joseph Newgarden, who won the Indy 500 back-to-back years in 2023 and 24. He's got his own bottle. I believe Marcus Ericsson, I think he's selling one, I'm pretty sure. And this is in a deal with Prairie Farms and Dairy Milk as well. I really love seeing stuff like this, to be honest, for the Indianapolis 500 because it's something that went away for about a year or so, but a lot of people were really sad when it went away. So I'm glad to see that Indy 500, they're making some good changes over there at the Indy 500 for the upcoming year. It's going to be a huge event once again, like it's always been the biggest motorsports event of the year across the board in every motorsport. So great to see this tradition coming back. Glad to see the milk bottles are officially returning in 2026. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Joey Logano. As there was reported by Adam Stern earlier this afternoon that Joey Logano has officially bought an ownership stake in a dealership with Ford. I think this Ford dealership might be in Huntersville, North Carolina, I'm pretty sure, and they sell Mustangs and many other big Fords as well. Now, why is this significant? Well, this could potentially lead to a contract extension for Joey Logano. Joey Logano, of course, we don't know exactly the contract state for him, but many people have been theorizing that Joey Logano, because of this, is potentially going to sign a long-term contract in the near foreseeable future. But I love to see Joey Logano getting the ownership side of things. I'm not sure, maybe down the road we see Joey Logano get into ownership, maybe for his son, for example, who has begun, I think, doing some racing very recently. And I think Logano wants to get prepared long-term because Joey Logano, he's getting a little bit older at this point. Joey Logano, 2026, will turn 36 years old. And you think at this point Logano's got 10 to 15 years, but I always theorize it because of how long Logano's been in the sport, because he's going in, his 18th season in the NASCAR Cup Series full-time. You're not sure how much longer Joey Logano is going to race in the sport. So you question that at this point. So getting involved in something like this, trying to set up for the long term, getting involved with dealerships, that's really cool to see. I love this nonetheless, and pretty awesome. Logano has bought an ownership stake in a dealership that sells cars. Really interesting and really solid stuff there for sure to see, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Vargas. As it was announced earlier today that Ryan Vargas will be racing in ARCA in 2026 in select events this year. He will drive the number 91 for Maple Motorsports in the opener at Daytona International Speedway. Reminder, Ryan Vargas recently was announced, I believe, to be one of the higher-ups or the general manager of the Maple Motorsports team going into 26, and we were expecting that he was going to make starts with this organization in 2026. He was at that ARCA test, I'm pretty sure, at Daytona about a month or so back, and now he's getting the chance and opportunity to run for the Maple Motorsports team. Ryan Vargas has been extremely busy. He, of course, competed in the NASCAR Euro Series not too long ago. He, of course, also competed in Monster Jam. Actually won an overall event in Monster Jam at the end of last year, I think around the time we had the Martinsville weekend. And he's just been doing a lot of phenomenal and great things. He's a spotter at points. He does a lot of online side of things. He's got a pretty huge TikTok. And, of course, on top of that, he got sponsored by TikTok a few years ago when he competed full-time in the O'Reilly Series around that 2021-2022 area. But this is a really exciting opportunity for Ryan to be working with this team. It gives me hope that Maple Motorsports can be a team in ARCA that can show some speed, because let's be real and honest, and no disrespect to Maple Motorsports, they struggled last year, and I really think this team needs a spark. I think having Ryan over there to drive the 91, I think he's going to do a pretty good job behind the wheel. And Ryan is a decent super speedway guy. Say what you want to say. I expect him to show some potentially really good things with this team and program throughout the year. And I'm interested to see what the rest schedule is going to look like for Ryan throughout the year and throughout the season. Nonetheless, good stuff to see, and happy to see that Ryan will be working with this team and will be working with this program, as I do think he'll probably show some solid and really good things for sure in the 2026 year with this organization working to help and build the program up going forward. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about RCR Enterprises. As it was initially reported by Joseph Strigley yesterday that RCR Enterprises had made some new leadership changes going into 2026. And there's a couple of notable ones that I do want to talk about here. Bob Fisher has been officially promoted to president of ECR and ECR Engines, while Mike Brown has been promoted to president of RCR Manufacturing. Mike Brown has been with RCR for many, many years, been part of the ECR group for quite some time, part of the manufacturing company. He had been a higher up. I believe one of the people in the higher up positions had retired recently, which is why Mike Brown is going over to work with RCR Manufacturing. But let's talk about Bob Fisher. Bob Fisher's been with ECR for many, many years. There's a lot of talk the ECR and Hendrick engines were going to combine a long time ago. I wonder if that's something down in the pipeline we could see, because you look at Ford, we've seen the Yates and Roush engines combined around that 2005, 2006 area. And then, of course, we saw Toyota combine all their engines with Joe Gibbs Racing at the time, MWR, when they were around, and Toyota was all together. They became Toyota engines around 2012 to 2013. I feel like that with the leadership change, Bob Fisher might be able to do that, and I think that's something they really need to do at this point. You look at the ECR teams. Sure, Shane Van Gisbergen got 5 wins last year in the NASCAR Cup Series, but it's because he's a great road course racer. Outside of him, there were only 2 ECR victories. Ross Chastain at the Coke 600 and Austin Dillon at the race at Richmond, where he got his 2nd straight Richmond victory. Outside of that, a lot of the ECR drivers really struggled, and I feel like Chevrolet kind of struggled a little bit as well. I expect, though, with this change coming in, that I think Bob Fisher will be able to bring a lot to the table to really help this program get in the best position going into 2026. Because I want to see the ECR in this combination work together very, very well. I hope it really does going into this year, and we see ECR be more competitive, considering they may lose one of their drivers to a rival organization. I'm really talking about Kyle Busch, by the way. He may go to the Hendrick side of things in the future if the 48 or even one of the Spire cars ends up being available. So you don't want to lose Kyle Busch, so you want to get your program better. Otherwise, you could lose one of your superstars in the near and not so distant future if you don't get it together. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Chad Kendrick. As it was announced yesterday that Chad Kendrick is back with Racklewer Racing in the 2026 NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series season. He will crew chief for Dawson Sun in the Craftsman Truck Series in 2026. Chad Kendrick is a veteran of the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. He worked with Timothy Peters for many, many years. He, of course, has been with Racklewer Racing for the last year or so, and he was a crew chief, I think, for Matt DiBenedetto a couple years back around 2022 or 2023. Matt DiBenedetto, while he did not win a race with this team and program, he showed some good pace and speed and made the playoffs in 2023, but got eliminated in the round of 8 and then a round of 10, and then, of course, got fired about a week or so after he got eliminated right before the Talladega weekend. And since that time, Dawson Sun and Ty Dillon have been with this program. I think Chad Kendrick is a talented crew chief. I think he's really good at what he does. I mean, he nearly won a championship with Timothy Peters many, many years ago. And I feel like there's a lot of promise and potential with Chad and Dawson Sun. I think you got to look at the Racklewer Racing team. Going into this year, they are expanding to a second car truck that will either be full-time or part-time. We know that Tony Breidinger is going to run potentially 7 or 8 races this year. We also know, of course, that potentially a guy like Kevin Harvick could come out of retirement and race into 2026 year, considering Kevin Harvick seems like he's certainly interested in wanting to do some racing. So I really hope that Chad and Dawson can continue to build that chemistry, because I feel like there's a lot of potential with Dawson. He just hasn't really shown all the potential yet, but I think there is a lot of potential because I think he hasn't fulfilled it, but he's got the talent to do it at this point. So I'm really hoping we can see this partnership grow and we can see these two work together very, very well in 2026. Nonetheless, excited to see these two working together once again. We'll see if Dawson can show some good pace and speed, and we'll see if Chad and Dawson have a really strong year in the 2026 season. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Greg Biffle. Now, if you watched the most recent episode of Race for the Seat, the 6th episode, a lot of the people went to the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And the person and individual that was really given the tour guide was none other than Greg Biffle. Greg Biffle showed a lot of things. They saw Robert Huffman's car on, I think, the block, I'm pretty sure, before they changed things for the 2026 induction group. And there were a lot of things they saw that were really, really cool. Seeing Greg Biffle on the show really made me sad, to be honest. I miss Greg Biffle. It's been of course, it's now been almost 2 months since the unfortunate tragedy that happened on December 18th when the Statesville plane crash happened. We're still thinking about the Biffle family currently at the moment. I had a feeling that going into 2026 that Greg Biffle might have been racing for Kaulig, considering he was involved with the programming of this. I just had a feeling they were probably going to put him behind the wheel. And would have been amazing to see that happen, because I think Greg Biffle certainly would have been really, really competitive if the thing had not unfortunately happened, what happened on December 18th. We're still mourning the Biffle family currently at the moment. It just felt sad to see that, because we all miss Greg Biffle. Gray was an amazing individual, a class act, always show respect to many, many people out there. And it was sad to see this happen where it did unfortunately end up happening, what did end up happening. And again, we're still thinking about the Bivol family, a very tragic and a very unfortunate situation that happened back in December. We got the investigation out there. It was a very big perfect storm of unfortunate circumstances that ended up happening that caused the unfortunate plane crash. Just a lot of things out of control, a lot of people in that situation, but we're still thinking about the Biffle family, and it was sad to see Biffle on there because I think he would have been racing this year had the unfortunate tragedy not ended up taking place. And now we're going to ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Super Speedway qualifying. As there was a report by the NASCAR Rumor Nostalgia account earlier today that according to them, it sounds like there may be some rules coming to Super Speedway qualifying and Daytona 500 qualifying as well for 2026. According to him, if drivers are messing with the window net or opening and putting their hands on the window net and having their hand out trying to get air, NASCAR may disallow the time and penalize the drivers, and those times will not be allowed in 2026. Now, keep in mind, this is from the NASCAR Rumor Nostalgia account, so not everything is always 100% correct. But generally, when they report on something like a rule change, for example, they generally are pretty accurate on stuff like this. I understand what NASCAR is trying to do here, where they're trying to kind of limit people from trying to get an aero advantage, but I feel like that something like this is not the most necessary in my opinion. I get what they're trying to do to make everything equal, but at some point you can't just limit the drivers, because what do? Keep your hands in all times? I guess that's what NASCAR is trying to do, is avoid a situation where they put their hands out. Maybe they have a situation where there's an aero situation that does come into play. I just don't know why you got to disallow the time. Maybe like a time penalty would come into play, but the fact they're considering disallowing times is crazy. So what happens if this happens, let's say, at a track like Kansas, for example? What if this happens down the road at tracks like, Chicagoland, where we're going back? Would you penalize at those types of tracks? I think that this could potentially be a very major gray area that could be a factor. I understand why they penalized for the glove situation with Joey Logano a few years back, where Logano did get a penalty for that. I thought that at the time was definitely justifiable. But I think in this case, I just don't know how to feel about this personally. I feel like this is certainly a little bit questionable. They're trying to make this move. I get what they're trying to do with the aero and getting rid of the aero advantages and the aero games, among other things. But you're always going to have teams that are trying to play the game when it comes to aero, trying to play the game when it comes to trying to find any sort of advantage they can. And you're going to see stuff like this from time to time, and it's just going to happen, unfortunately. It's just a natural thing that happens, and it's a normal thing that does happen on the track. So, while I'm definitely not surprised to see them complaining about stuff like this and potentially looking at rule changes, I'm not the biggest fan of this personally because I don't trust it, and I think that NASCAR may do a wrong call down the road if they do something like this, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Fox Sports. Now, we talked about the story on the channel yesterday in my shorter video, but it was officially announced yesterday. They have officially announced the 2026 Daytona 500 broadcast lineup, and they also have announced the broadcast for the Craftsman Truck Series and even some of the other stuff they'll be doing like ARCA in 2026. For this year's Daytona 500, the main people in the booth are going to be Mike Joy, who will be calling his 47th Daytona 500, Clint Boyer, and Kevin Harvick. Pretty straightforward, all three of them working together for the last 3 years. That will continue in 2026 for the third consecutive season. I feel like that down the road, they're going to have to make changes to the Fox booth on the Cup side of things. This could be potentially the final year for Mike Joy as a lead broadcaster or play-by-play guy, considering Mike Joy at the end of this year is going to be 77 years old. Normally, you don't have play-by-play announcers. They're still calling in their upper 70s, going into their 80s. Normally, you have younger guys coming in and younger gals also potentially coming in that can kind of take that place and get the energy. The exciting part, though, is in the lower series with the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. So once again, unfortunately, Jamie Little is back in the broadcast booth. Not the most exciting thing there. But her co-people, she's not going to be doing every single race in 2026 like she did in 2025. Eric Brennan and Brent Stover will also be play-by-play announcers for the NASCAR Craftsman Truck coverage in 2026. I am excited mainly for Eric Brennan here. Everyone knows me very well. I have been very much pushing for Eric Brennan to get the chance and opportunity to call NASCAR races. Eric Brennan is really, really good. When I think of people who could potentially replace Mike Joy when Mike Joy retires, I think Eric Brennan is a guy that could come in and take over for Mike Joy and just get up to speed and be really good at it, because he's always really good with the smart modified torque calls. He was really good with the ARCA calls in 2025 in the races that he did. And he certainly is a fantastic play-by-play announcer with the Cars Tour. And when I've listened to him call the Snowball Derby, he has done a fantastic and really good job. Brent Stober, hit or miss with the guy. He can be good at times. He's got his moments for sure, but he's also not used to it as much compared to Eric Brennan. But when I'm looking at the future for Fox, I think Eric Brennan is that guy who is certainly going to do a really good job. It's a shame he can't do the full broadcast, but it's a step in the right direction. Again, no disrespect to Jamie Little. She is a very great pit reporter. She's just not a good play-by-play announcer, but I'm excited for Eric. I think he's earned this right an opportunity to be a play-by-play announcer for the Craftsman Truck Series. I think he's going to do a really solid job on the play-by-play side of things, and I think it'll be fun to watch him on the play-by-play because I think he's going to, again, do a really good opportunity. It's a great opportunity for him. Excited to see what he can do with it in 2026, as, again, he'll be the play-by-play announcer for some truck races in 2026. Really awesome stuff. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Tricon Garage. Now, yesterday, Tricon Garage put out a little bit of a post showing all of their full-time drivers for 2026. And it looks like that Tricon will be downsizing their program a little bit going into 2026. We know the one truck will be on the track with a lot of different all-star drivers throughout the year. We know that Tanner Gray will be back in the 15 truck. Gia Ruggiero will be back in the number 17. And we know going into this year, Caden Honeycutt is taking over the 11 truck from a driver named Corey Heim, who will be making starts with Tricon in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2026. But looking at this post, this tells me that Tricon Garage may not be bringing back their number 5 truck in 2026. Obviously, with the departure of Tony Breidinger no longer being in the program and the team having a lot of trucks and losing some of that sponsorship for the number 5 truck, I think that is a big reason why they are downsizing, getting rid of the number 5 truck. I think we all can agree at this point, though, the 5 truck, unless you got a really competitive guy like Nick Sanchez, for example, I think it was going to be really difficult to keep that 5 truck around because a lot of times you need the sponsorship in funding. And judging by the fact that Tony Breidinger isn't even running a full season in 2026 at all, I think that was definitely a sign they were going to have to make some sort of changes going into the year and going into the season. Now, the big question is who else could be with the Tricon team and maybe making select starts. Obviously, we're going to talk about one of those drivers here in just a short little bit near the second half of the episode. And then, of course, we have other drivers like Jimmy Johnson been confirmed for San Diego, and Corey Heim is going to drive the truck at Atlanta. I would imagine that Brent Cruz more than likely is going to make a few starts in that truck this year, even though it'll be full-time with Joe Gibbs Racing in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series. Maybe we see Brandon Jones, William Sawalsh, maybe Christopher Bell or Denny Hamlin come down. We know John Hunter's doing some stuff with Homer Friesen at Daytona. Maybe he makes a start or two in the one like he did last year. So I think there's a lot of guys who could get a chance and opportunity to be with this program in 2026. But again, it's disappointing to see they're downsizing. But again, I'm not shocked and surprised by this move, because sometimes you have to downsize to get your program better. We saw that with Spire Motorsports last year when they got rid of one of their trucks, and their program got better near the end of the year, who we'll talk about, of course, here in just a second. Sometimes downsizing and making your program faster is not the worst thing, and I think that'd be the right decision for them if they went this direction and did downsize. So we'll see if the 5 truck is, in fact, on the racetrack in 2026. It doesn't seem like that's the case with the announcement today. It'd be a shame if it wasn't the case, but it wouldn't be surprising and shocking either if that was the case. Also, they're gone, considering I think they want to get that program a little bit stronger and a little bit faster going into 26, and because they don't have Corey Heim to carry the team going into the year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kaulig Racing. As it was announced yesterday afternoon that Kaulig Racing has officially announced their 2026 NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series driver and crew chief lineup. For the number 10 truck, they'll be driven by Daniel Dye, Dan Stillman, a veteran and crew chief of the Craftsman Truck Series for Kevin Harvick Incorporated and other teams, and even Paul Menard in the Cup Series. He'll be the crew chief for Daniel Dye in 2026. For the number 12 truck, they'll be driven by Brendan Butterbean Queen, Eddie Pardue, who was a crew chief in the 2 races that Brendan drove in the O'Reilly Series for the Kaulig Racing team in the number 11 machine. He will be the crew chief for the number 12 truck in 2026. For the number 14 truck that we will know here in the future who will be driving that truck in the next week or so, Bruce Cook, a veteran crew chief who also was an owner in the truck series, he will be the crew chief for the number 14 in 2026. For the number 16, that'll be driven by Justin Haley, the one I'm most excited about, Mike Hillman Jr., a champion crew chief in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. He'll be the crew chief for Justin Haley this year. And finally, for the number 25 truck to be driven by Tony Stewart and other potential drivers like Cletus McFarland, who might be running the truck race at Daytona with another organization, Casey Kane, Bobby Gordon, among other names like AJ Allmendinger. Alex Johnson, who's been a crew chief in the O'Reilly Series for the team, he will be the crew chief for the 25 in 2026. Gotta say, they have assembled a pretty solid crew chief and driver lineup. The most exciting one for me is Mike Hillman Jr. He was last year with the Freedom Racing Enterprises organization. Of course, his father now is working over there as a crew chief, but this is a great opportunity for Mike Hillman Jr. He, of course, is crew chief at points. He was on the pit crew at one point for Greg Biffle many, many years ago, which was a 16. And then, of course, he did work with a lot of different drivers over the years. He's worked with Todd Bodine. He also had an ownership in one organization in the Cup Series. I think he's going to do a phenomenal job as a crew chief this year. And then you have Dan Stillman coming in. He's a veteran of truck competition. Like I mentioned, worked at KHI, worked a lot of different organizations over the years, and worked with Dale Earnhardt Incorporated and crew chief for Paul Menard. And then I mentioned Bruce Cook. I don't know what this means for the Cook Racing Enterprise or the Cook Racing team this upcoming year. They've been rumored they might make some starts this year with Patrick Staropoli, with Bruce Cook being a crew chief. I'm not sure if that is going to be a case at this point. But honestly, I think it's a solid crew chief driver lineup and a combo for the year. I'm really excited to see how this team is going to do this year. So I think there's definitely some excitement for the team and program in the upcoming year. I think there's some good things about the team. I'm excited to see where Kaulig Racing goes, where this team can perform, and I think they're in a really good position because I do think this team will be a solid team. I know people have questions on the program with some of the moves they made, but trust me, I think you should all be really excited about it. I think Kaulig is going to be a pretty good team this year, and I think their truck program, they might struggle early, but by the end of the year, I think they will win races in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in the 2026 season. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Spire Motorsports. As it was reported by the Stock Car Nostalgia account earlier today that according to him, he has heard a rumor that it sounds like Spire Motorsports may be running a third part-time truck after all in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2026. And when you look at the picture, it looks like the number they're going to be using is the number 71. Last, of course, the 71 was driven by Raja Karuf, who drove that truck full-time for the last 2 years. But Raj, of course, is moving up to the NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series full-time. He'll drive the 88 car for 23 races this year. The other 10 will be filled up by Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Alex Bowman, and William Byron. In the other 10 races, he is going to drive the 32 car, which, of course, will also have Ross Chastain behind the wheel for 4 races also throughout the year. But now the 71, with the lack of sponsorship, they're looking for some people to go in. My question is, who drives this truck in 2026? Some will look at the drivers that are currently driving for the team. Well, all 3 drivers will probably end up driving a 71 or a 77. My best guess is this could be a potential seat for a guy like Kyle Busch, perhaps, and maybe make a few starts, considering Kyle Busch did drive for this team last year. I had heard he was maybe going to Nice, but considering the fact that he drove for Spire the last couple of years, I would think he'd be a potential candidate to get behind the wheel of this truck in 2026. Then you have to look at guys like Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Alex Bowman, William Byron. Considering they have the Hendrick Motorsports connection, and they've all made starts with Spire Motorsports in the past, and a couple of these guys have gone to victory lane with Spire, these guys would make a lot of sense at this point. If Nick Sanchez can't find a full-time ride for the upcoming year, maybe you get Nick Sanchez behind the wheel in 2026. I think that is certainly a possibility going into the upcoming year. Or maybe you get some other special names we're not even thinking about. Maybe this could be a potential ride for Tristan McKee for a few events. Tristan McKee, from what I understand, he is currently rumored to be making some starts in the Craftsman Truck Series this year. And I think I've heard him potentially being a candidate for one of the trucks once he does turn 16, because he doesn't turn 16 until late July going into August. And once you turn 16, you can compete in the truck series. And while Tristan can sometimes be in over his head, he does have the talent. I think he's shown some of that promise and potential. So I'm interested to see who will get in the third part-time truck. Maybe we see some surprises go out there. Some will mention Cletus, but Cletus, from what I understand, he might, again, have a truck series ride for a few events with the Nice Motorsports team potentially, but that's still not confirmed at this point. We'll just have to wait and see. Nonetheless, I'm interested to see who will get behind the wheel of this truck in the 2026 year. I'm excited about it because I do want to see this program be competitive. I want to see Spire win races. They're not going to have a full-time driver. They're going to have all-star drivers this year. We'll see if this program can be somewhat successful with their speed in the 2026 year in trucks. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Dale Jr. Now, Dale Jr. was commenting about the cookout clash at Bowman Gray Stadium. Obviously, you've been on Twitter and social media over the last few days. We're still currently in a delay at this point, though likely by the time any of you are watching this video, cars should be on track, weather permitting, because there is a chance weather could be in the area. But a lot of people have been clamoring because of how bad the weather has been in North Carolina for the last week or so. A lot of people have been clamoring for the event to go back to Daytona because it worked at Daytona, a lot of people said, and we shouldn't be running up in the warm and the colder temperatures because of the winter storm that did happen. I do want to emphasize something important. While yes, it definitely can be cold in Bowman Gray, and while we did have cold weather at Bowman Gray this year, I do want to remind that last year was in the 40s and 50s, and looking at the next couple days, it should start warming up a little bit. Unfortunately, they got two different winter storms within a different period. They had an ice storm like a week prior to that. And then, of course, because they don't have the infrastructure ready to go for the event, they didn't have everything set up and planned, which is why they postponed it to Wednesday. Now, could have they run it today? For sure. But Justin Swalling, the guys managing the event, basically put a lot of caution out there and was being cautious. And I can understand being cautious in a situation like this. As for Dale Jr.'s comments, Dale Jr. basically said that the clash, it had a big identity many years ago when it ran at Daytona, when you had a 20-lap event and you had a lot of people and you had basically pole sitters only being out there. But when he started adding a lot of changes, started adding the gimmicks around 2009, 2010, the event lost its luster, and then, of course, 2019 and 2020 happened. I think people just forget that 4 or 5 years ago, this event lost its luster. It ran its course. I don't disagree that if you can't have it at Daytona, if you can't have it at Bowman Gray, I mean, Daytona wouldn't be an awful option, but if you bring it back to Daytona, people have to show up, and people have to watch. The last time it was on FS1 in 2020, and very few people showed up. 10,000 people were in the stands, and just nobody was at the event in 2020, and you got to think about that. Like, the reason we went away from the event in Daytona is because no one was going there. So while people clamor for it, and it can also be cold and rain. 2019, we had rainstorms that affected the event. It was a single file train. And I honestly would rather see what we're doing now, maybe go in a different, warmer climate, something that we can do. But I agree with Junior, the event lost its luster. It doesn't have the same luster it had back then. And I think what they're doing with the Clash is working somewhat decent, in my opinion. I think there's some good things about the current Clash at this point, and I think there's definitely some things that fans can like about the current Clash. You can disagree with me on that, but I think Junior does have a pretty good point about what the current Clash feels like at this point, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, Kyle Busch went on SiriusXM NASCAR radio yesterday or a couple days ago, and it seems like Kyle Busch is not a major fan of the new chase format that got announced for 2026, or should I say the old chase format that is coming back in 2026. Kyle Busch basically said, I thought we got away from that for a reason. He said a big reason why we went away from the chase is because of the fact that, number one, Jimmy Johnson dominated, but then you bring up Talladega near the end of the year, and basically it's a race that can be a crapshoot, and you can have one or two bad races, and that can cost yourself a chance at a championship. I do think Eric Esep said it best in his video. I don't know why people are looking at Talladega like it's the big boogeyman at this point, especially since you'll have 8 prior races, mind you, 7 prior races to make sure you're in good position, and you'll be in a solid position there. And while, yes, I understand Kyle Busch's sentiment, because he does mention the fact of all the teams that do win, like Hendrick, Penske, and Gibbs, you can argue the fact that Shane Van Gisbergen and Trackhouse won 6 races last year, which, by the way, is the same amount of wins that Penske got in 2025. Yes, SVG got most of the wins, but the point is other teams did win in 2026. And let's be real honest, and no disrespect to Kyle, he's being a little bit of a realist here. He knows that the teams that are going to win the races are Hendrick, Penske, and Gibbs. But you know the last time we had a true underdog champion? Alan Kulwicki in 1992. Someone mentioned the Furniture Racing deal in 2017. And yes, that was an underdog story, but they had Joe Gibbs Racing support at that time and a massive technical alliance with Joe Gibbs Racing. Most of the teams that win the championships are the best organizations. And I think while, yes, a full season championship would be the best way to crown a champion, this was the best compromise that you could have when it came to the championship. And again, I understand the frustration from Kyle a little bit, because I think he knows right now, especially with the unknowns of where he might be going and where if he will stay at RCR or not. I think he knows he doesn't have the best chance and opportunity to win a championship in his current situation, in his current place. So I think that's why he's frustrated, because he can't win one race, because I expect Kyle to be a little more competitive this year. He's going to have Jim Pullman on the box, which Jim Pullman certainly, I think, is going to do a solid job as a crew chief this year. But I understand his frustration a little bit in a sense, but at the same token, same time, I think that because that's old blonde Kyle Busch, and hey, we respect old blonde Kyle Busch in a sense, but I also don't agree with everything Kyle Busch says here, because while yes, you can have one bad race, every team can have a bad race, and nobody's going to be picture perfect, but you're going to have the most deserving guys win the championships more than likely, and I think that's what it should be about at this point, because I think a lot of people agree that the most deserving drivers should win the championships overall when it comes to the sport, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about a few quick tidbits going into 2026. Bob Pockers yesterday wrote a little bit of an inside the garage thing that he'll be doing every single week in regards to IndyCar and NASCAR, since that's the two sports he covers currently at the moment. And there were three interesting tidbits in regards to NASCAR going into 2026. The first one revolves around Corey Heim. We don't know exactly how many races Corey Heim is going to run with 2011 Racing in 2026, but it seems like the number might be increasing for this year. Initially, we thought it might be 10, but it sounds like he might be running at least a dozen races in the number 67 car in 2026. He, of course, will be attempting to qualify for the Daytona 500 this year. We don't know exactly the rest of the schedule. He is going to run the Truck Series race at Atlanta with Tricon Garage, and he's going to make a lot of starts in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, potentially with the Tricon team, and make a lot of starts, as there's a lot of talk he might be a full-time driver potentially for 2026. He's one of the drivers that I wish were full-time, like Nick Sanchez, for example, or even Matt DiBenedetto, but Corey Heim is expected to make a lot of starts in Cup with the 2311 Racing team. Let's talk about another Corey LaJoie. Corey LaJoie, of course, will be attempting to qualify for the Daytona 500 this year. It sounds like RFK Racing may be looking to run the 99 car in more events than just the Daytona 500 this year. Now, it's unknown if Corey LaJoie will be the driver in those races, but depending on if Corey LaJoie, one, makes the 500, and two, impress in the 500, if they run at tracks like Talladega later in the year, maybe running like Atlanta or Homestead or something like that, I could see Corey LaJoie making a few starts in the NASCAR Cup Series potentially in that 99, because he will be focused with Amazon going in the upcoming year. That is going to be a big focus for him, because he will be part of the Amazon broadcast going into the upcoming season, and certainly that is going to be somewhat of a focus for him going into the year. But he also wants to do some racing. He won't be full-time this year. He will, of course, later today be competing in the Cookout Clash, trying to make the event in the number 6. We know the RFK cars did show some good pace and speed last year, so I think he'll probably have a good shot. Finally, Tony Stewart. We talked about this on the channel last week. It sounds like Tony Stewart might run more NASCAR races in 2026. He might run more than just a race at Daytona. If things go well at Daytona, which I think he'll be a major factor at Daytona for the win with the Colic team, we might see Tony Stewart run more events in the 2026 year. And I want to see Tony run more races than just Daytona. Maybe St. Petersburg, maybe San Diego, maybe Richmond, maybe IRP. But I think Tony coming back will be great. Just like I mentioned with Kevin Harvick, he might also be looking to return here in the near and not so distant future. Another driver like Haley Deegan also, it sounds like, might be making some Truck Series starts as well. Nonetheless, it's certainly going to be interesting to see what happens with some of these moves and potential changes that might be happening, and we'll see if those changes may end up happening in regards to that going into the 2026 year. We'll see if some of those changes do come into effect, and we see some great changes with these programs going into 26 for some of these teams and drivers. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Dario Franchitti. Now, I did a video covering a story on the channel earlier today. It was officially announced earlier today that Dario Franchitti is returning to NASCAR for the first time since 2008. He will drive the number 1 truck for Tricon Garage at the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. And this is in partnership with Legacy Motor Club, Tricon Garage, and also Dollar Tree, and maybe even Dollar General will be sponsoring Dario Franchitti in this Truck Series event. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, this is going to be the first NASCAR sanctioned race that Dario Franchitti has been racing in since 2008, and the first major motorsports event that Dario Franchitti was competed in since 2013 when the crash happened in Houston. He, of course, had a massive crash at Houston driving for Chip Ganassi Racing. Since that time, of course, he's been doing a lot of historic car racing and vintage racing. He raced in Goodwill not too long ago and was pretty competitive over there. And, of course, he's been looking to get back to racing. He tried to compete in the Dubai 24 Hours. Not sure how that went, unfortunately, because we don't know how he did in the Mercedes. But he's getting an opportunity to race in this event. When these rumors started circulating, I didn't truly believe them initially, but when a lot of the rumors kept popping up, and Tony Donahue was the first one to initially report on this, and Marshall Pruitt then reports on it, you kind of start hearing a lot of things, and you start thinking, seems like something like this might end up happening. I'm excited about this for Dario. It's his first NASCAR sanctioned event since 2008 when he competed for Chip Ganassi Racing, and was somewhat competitive in the 40 car. In the O'Reilly Series, he won a pole at, I believe, Watkins Glen, finished in the top 5 in that event. Led laps at Bristol, and I know his time at Cup wasn't that great, but in the lower series, he did show some good speed. This also is the first truck start that he has made since 2007. The only start he made. He drove in Martinsville for Cunningham Motorsports, which had an association, of course, with the Chip Ganassi Racing team. He was running in the top 15, top 20, but got caught up in a crash and incident. This is going to be the first time he's raced in nearly 20 years. It's kind of crazy, all these drivers coming out of retirement. Tony Stewart, Kevin Harvick potentially, Jimmy Johnson coming out of retirement. Who's next at this point? Are we going to see other drivers come out who haven't raced in 20 years? Who knows at this point? Do we see Bill Elliott somehow come out of retirement like he did in 2018? That would be exciting because I don't know if Bill Elliott's ever ran a truck in his career. But I look at Dario Franchitti. He's going to be at a track he's had experience before, and having that experience could be a major factor for him having a chance and opportunity to run up front in this race. Because I think the one truck is going to be competitive this year. The Tricon team is expected to show some good pace and speed, and I think they're going to be somewhat competitive in 2026 because I look at this truck to be one of the favorites to potentially contend for victories, contend for wins, and I think that he may have an advantage. Now, there's going to be a lot of guys that are going to be competitive this year, also have to go up against, but I think he'll certainly be fast and certainly be competitive. Glad to see Dario Franchitti racing once again, the first time in a very long time. I think he shows some good stuff, and I think he'll certainly show some good pace and very strong speed with this team and program going into the 2026 NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series season. And maybe he'll run more races if he does really well in this event, or this might be a one-off. Maybe he does some Cup stuff with Legacy Motor Club in the future as well. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports. As it was officially confirmed earlier today that the trial and antitrust case between 2311 Racing, Front Row Motorsports, and NASCAR is officially been dismissed. What this means is that 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports have officially signed the new charter agreement. It is worth noting, and Breakar mentioned this in his video as well, it's worth noting that not every single team has, as far as we know, has signed the new charter agreement. But I would imagine every single team will end up signing the charter agreement for 2026 because it wouldn't make any sense to not sign the charter agreement because the biggest thing the teams were after were the permanent charters. Obviously, back in December, we know that they went to trial. It lasted for 10 to 12 days. There was a letter that Johnny Morris wrote, who of course owns Bass Pro Shops. He wrote a letter out basically begging everybody to settle, also asked for Steve Phelps' resignation. And then, of course, Steve Phelps, after all this came out, he resigned from the sport. There's a lot of talk about an NDA that Richard Childress has. Some theorize that the NDA situation played a big factor into this. But I also think Jim Francis' testimony up on the stand played a big role while NASCAR settled, because had they not settled this case and not gotten to where they did, things could have been looking really bad, and the charter system itself could have gone away, and it would have been a bad situation for everybody involved. I think the big thing to look at this is that this case is finally over. This may not be the last time anything from this goes to court. We may still have the situation where Richard, not sure if he's going to go to court or sue at this point. Not sure if that's going to happen right now. But I think when it comes to this antitrust case, it's a good thing this thing is finally dismissed. Now we can fully focus on what's happening on the racetrack, focus on things like silly season and stuff that's going to be fun to watch. As much at times it was fun to cover initially, as I had a lot of fun covering the story, it was great to finally move on, get this thing settled, and it seems like NASCAR and teams are working together. You've got the Hardys deal between 2311 Front Row and 2311 and NASCAR's help with that, getting back into sport. Obviously, McDonald's left, but Hardy's coming back, and I think that was the deal that NASCAR really orchestrated to make sure that ended up happening. And I think, again, for a lot of fans, having his case dismissed, having all the drivers not be in a worry position like Tyler Reddick, Bubba Wallace, and Riley Herbst, although they may end up being free agents in 2026 regardless, considering there is a lot of talk they may end up going to the free agency market in the near future as well. I'm just glad to see that this whole thing's kind of through and we can just focus now on the future of getting the sport back on track. The main thing now is to grow the sport once again and get the sport back in the best position that we can, because I think there's a lot that needs to be done to get the sport to grow once again. I really hope we can, as the sport, continue to grow and we can move the sport and move the needle toward the future to get the sport in the best position. But I'm glad this case has been dismissed. We finally now move toward the future to try to grow the sport once again and take the sport in the best position going to the near and not so distant future. Hopefully things can go better for the sport here very, very soon. Now we're going to jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about the Charlotte ROVAL. As it was officially confirmed earlier today that the Charlotte ROVAL is no more going into 2026 and NASCAR will not be racing on the Charlotte Road Course in the 2026 year. Instead, for the fall race for all three series in 2026, they'll be transitioning back over to the Charlotte Oval for the fall race in 2026. The first time the Charlotte Oval has hosted the fall event since 2017. There's obviously been a lot of rumors about this. Jordan Bianchi was the first one to break this news. This likely was going to end up taking place. And Marcus Smith did confirm on an episode, Kelly Earnhardt on the Dirty Mo Media side of things, he confirmed that they are going back to this in 2026. Now, it is very important to note that people were wondering if this is going to be a 500-mile race for the NASCAR Cup Series in 2026. Well, it was confirmed they'll be doing 400 miles for the second race in 2026 instead of the traditional 500 miles they did when they had it on back on the oval. It will be the same length as what the Bank of America ROVAL was in 2025, just now back on the oval. This means that I believe this race is going to be a 267 lap event. So basically how it's been for a lot of the mile-and-a-half races like Las Vegas, like Chicagoland is going to be this year, and like Homestead and other tracks as well. As much as I think it'd been cool to do 500 miles and make it a 334 lap event, I think this is not a bad decision because most of the mile and a half are going that direction, and it makes the Coke 600 still feel like a pretty special event because 400 miles is still a pretty long race, but it's now going to make the Coke 600 at the track feel a little more special. Now, why is this move taking place going into 2026? It's very, very simple. Look, I like the Charlotte ROVAL for instance. I think the Charlotte ROVAL did have a good purpose. And to be fair, the last year or so, I think the 2025 edition of the Charlotte ROVAL for the Cup Series and the O'Reilly Series and truck in a sense as well, I think the racing there was actually pretty good last year. But I think we all can agree that the event had ran its course. Number one, the racing, while it's been all right for Cup, it again had not been generally spectacular with the next-gen car. And the attendance was going down for the Charlotte ROVAL every year. And the ratings were going down every year. You compare that to Charlotte Oval. What is the type of racing that is the best currently at the moment with the next-gen car? It's simple. The mile and a halves in the intermediate tracks are what is the best for this car right now. You can't disagree with me on this. The Coke 600, the last 2 years, has been, in my opinion, the best crown jewel event on the schedule. A few years ago, back in like 2018, 2019, that area, you could argue the Coke 600 was a race that was a big chore and a big bore fest to get through those last couple of years. But then when they switched to the next-gen car in 2022, the Coke 600 went from maybe being my least favorite crown jewel outside the Brickyard 400 at that point to being my favorite crown jewel event to watch. And people argue that last year's Coke 600 was the best race of the year. That's how good the Coke 600 has really felt the last couple of years. And the intermediate racing at tracks like Kansas and Atlanta, those technically a super speedway, and Chicagoland's probably going to be a banger this year. And tracks like, Vegas, for example, and Homestead have done so well with this car. And tracks like Michigan have been really, really good that they really had to make this move because it's just best for racing at the track. And I think it's going to be a fun race. I really think it is because it's going to be better for the fans to watch. Now, that being said, as much as I am excited to see the second oval coming back, I am disappointed there is no road course in the schedule. And some are going to say, well, what's the problem with not having a road course there? I think when you especially have a championship format like the Chase, I feel like having a different type of track in the Chase format, because having a road course race in a Chase is going to be a good opportunity for the best representation of the whole entire season. This is why I feel like that Watkins Glen should have been near the end of the year. or at least close that gap up for the matter. How in the world did we decide putting Watkins Glen in May? That doesn't make any sense to me. I just don't understand why they can't have decided, hey, let's move the race now back to July or August, or put it in the Chase. If we're going to have any road course races in the Chase, to me, the best option is putting Watkins Glen in there, because Watkins Glen would be a very fun race to watch, and it would be absolutely amazing and just good racing at that track. I know the next gen's not been as good, but it would be the road course race I put in there because the weather's better. The camping this year is going to be terrible for it because it's in May, and I just don't understand who thought that was a good decision, because that's one of the dumbest decisions I think I've seen in the sport in quite some time, to move Watkins Glen off its traditional path. It's about as bad as Dover getting an all-star race, by the way. So if we're going to do a road course race, put Watkins Glen in there, because that's going to be a race that's going to put on a really good show for the fans and people are going to be really excited about. But I'm glad this move is happening. There's been some good moves happening in NASCAR. The Charlotte Roval not being around anymore. The Charlotte Oval coming back. And then, of course, the Chase returning, which I think it's going to be better for championship. And there's been other good changes been happening in the sport as of late. I think this is a really solid change, and I think it's good to see the Charlotte Oval coming back. It's going to be sad to see Roval go in a sense, but going back to the Oval, it brings tradition, and I think it's a good tradition to bring back to the sport, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Brad Keselowski. Now, I talked about the story on the channel yesterday, and a lot of people were definitely really surprised to hear this. But Brad Keselowski, of course, many people are wondering if Brad, because of how long it took for the clash to happen, and by the time it's been many of you watch this race had likely probably had happened. But because of how long it took, many people thought, could Brad Keselowski already be clear enough to return to run the clash? Well, Brad Keselowski revealed some very interesting information in basically a little bit of a Q&A. He basically said, short answer, no. Long answer, I right now do not have a valid NASCAR license going into 2026. There are some tests that are happening later in the week, most likely on Thursday or Friday. There's going to be some tests upcoming to make sure I am cleared and ready to go for Daytona. Busy week ahead and long week ahead for me. When I heard this news and when I heard Brad Keselowski say that he is still not cleared at this point to run at Daytona, that is definitely really concerning and definitely shocking and surprising. Obviously, Brad Keselowski, we all know, unfortunately suffered a leg injury, a femur injury, during a skiing situation where he actually wasn't even skiing at that point. He had stepped out of his car to get on the ice and basically go and do skiing. He stepped out and tripped on the ice and unfortunately broke his femur. He said that that is the worst injury he has had in his racing up to this point. And it's said of the most painful injury he has had. Now, again, this is not the first time that Brad Keselowski's been injured before. Brad Keselowski, of course, did suffer an injury back in 2011 during a testing crash, I'm pretty sure, at Road Atlanta. I think he broke his leg and ankle at that time, but he did end up winning at Pocono the next week. But the difference is now between 2011 and 2026, Brad Keselowski in 2011 was 27 years old. Brad Keselowski going into 2026, he's 41, going to be 42 here very, very soon. It takes a little bit longer for people in their early 40s for things to heal than someone that's around my age, which I'm around 27 at this point, that is in their mid-20s. It's going to take a little more time for someone to heal at that point. And that's why I predicted Brad Keselowski wasn't going to make the Chase this year, because he's still not even cleared at this point to run. Now, I expect Brad Keselowski to end up getting cleared and get that license back, because it seems like there's a required thing where you have to have a NASCAR sanctioned license in order to compete in the sport. I would think it's a little weird to me that a guy like Brad Keselowski doesn't have a sanctioned NASCAR license right now, considering the fact that Brad Keselowski is a champion of the sport. He's won races just a year or so ago, for that matter, and he literally was pretty competitive in 2025 and nearly won the season finale last year. So, again, well, I think Brad will have some issues in the competitive side of things a little bit, just because Brad Keselowski is probably still not going to be 100% at the start of the year. I think he'll get cleared, but I think there's some uncertainty around whether Brad will be ready for the 500. I'm not sure he's on standby for him, because the two guys you would think that will be on standby, that being Chandler Smith and, of course, Corey LaJoie, they're both competing. Chandler's driving a 36, Corey's driving a fourth car. Unless they get rid of the fourth car, but I don't think people want to see that at this point. Do you get Lane Riggs to substitute? Do you get Cletus to substitute at this point? Not really sure at this time. But it's kind of crazy to me that Brad Keselowski does not have a valid NASCAR license going into 2026 right now. And that is certainly shocking and definitely certainly surprising at this point. So hopefully they can get that situation sorted out and cleared out going to the upcoming year for Brad, because I think by the end of the year, Brad, he's going to probably be really competitive, right? I think we all expect Brad, but he's probably going to show some strong pace and really good speed near the end of the year and end of season. But I think it's just shocking to see that he didn't have a valid NASCAR license. But once again, I think Brad will get it sorted out. I certainly think he'll get it cleared up for the start of the year. And I think Brad will be in the best position for himself going into 2026. So we'll see what happens there. We'll see how the test goes. If Brad is good enough from the test, he should be cleared. A lot of media won't be there. Of course, it will probably be on the same day as the Rockian test, which is taking place on Friday, where a lot of teams are going to be down there. People like Matt DiBenedetto, among other big names, are going to be at that test, and all the big names are going to be at the test at the end of the week on Friday, which is a one-day test for everyone to get on the track. We'll probably talk about that on Monday potentially, but it's certainly interesting for sure, and kind of crazy that Brad is still not medically cleared to run Daytona yet, which I thought he already had that test, but I think because of the delays of the Clash, among other things, that's hurt Brad's chance to get on the racetrack at this point. Hopefully he'll get this situation figured out and can be on the racetrack really, really soon. So, that's for today's long NASCAR news and other motorsports episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Notifications on so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go over that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go over that and comment your thoughts below on today's video. You think it's crazy that Brad doesn't have a valid NASCAR license at this point? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about other stories to talk about today on the channel, like the Charlotte ROVAL not existing this upcoming season? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Till later today on the channel, hopefully if the weather cooperates, we should have the review for the Cookout Clash. We'll have reactions to the winner of the poll. We'll also maybe do a review on the Last Chance Qualifier before the race ends up taking place. Then, of course, on Thursday, might do another NASCAR news video if there's a lot of news that breaks. And then on Friday, same thing. Then this weekend, I will have some special videos dropping. I am going to have an updated O'Reilly Auto Parts driver lineup video with the season kicking off. We're going to do an updated video on that. And maybe the truck winner predictions might come out on Saturday. There's a lot of content coming very soon on people like Haley Deegan, Shane Gisberg, and Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain, Sheldon Creed, Sammy Hart, Frankie Muniz, Cletus Vaughn, Dodge Ram, Brad Keselowski, Connor Zilch, Junior Motorsports, Red Bull, Brian Vickers, you name that, Donald Trump, all the good stuff. Eric Almirola, Nick Sanchez, Corey Haim, Corey LaJoy, all the good stuff we'll talk about on the channel in the coming days and weeks as well. As we're about a week away from the 500, we got racing today. Should be exciting and fun. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, buddy.